What's up, guys? Welcome to the channel and welcome to my garage. In today's video, we'll be discussing what I believe to be the most important modification I've made to my Busa for the drag strip yet. More important than the exhaust, the ECU flash, or even the air shifter. Now, I was experiencing some serious banging and bucking at launch, which made launching smoothly nearly impossible. What I ended up doing is eliminating the back torque limiter with the Brock's Hayabusa clutch mod. Now, it is a little pricey and there are other ways to go, but I highly recommend this modification because it is a really solid and lightweight construction. I'll discuss the options, I'll discuss what exactly we're doing by erasing the back torque limiter, and I'll show you guys how it's done. So this is what the back torque limiter looks like. It's two-piece construction that drives the clutch. So if you look at it, both of these pieces have, well, this one has two tapered sides on both sides of these nubs, on all three of them. And then if you look inside the other piece, it has a tapered side and a square side. So when the engine's driving the clutch, it's pushing on the square side, keeping everything square, and nothing's really happening. There's really no other action. But what really causes the bucking is this plane here, and the fact that this is tapered on both sides, it'll actually cause the slipper clutch to activate while you're accelerating, and that's going to cause some serious problems when launching. Now the way it works is when you let off the gas and your engine braking, the tapered side slides the mechanism so it releases the clutch and it allows the clutch to slip. We want to get rid of this, so there's a couple different ways to replace this. The cheapest way is there is a ring kit that you can buy that goes on the back side of this, and it prevents the sliding action from happening. It prevents this from sliding and loosening up the clutch. The other method is to weld these together, but there's a specific depth that you need to have these at, and you need a really good welder, someone you really trust. So that's really why I ended up going with the Brock's clutch mod. It eliminated this heavy assembly, even though you could do it with something cheap like a spring, or you can get a buddy to weld it. I really liked the lightweight construction and the ease of installation, and I highly recommend going with the Brock's clutch mod if you're taking your bike to the drag strip. So I already had this clutch mod installed, but I reverted her back to stock for the purposes of this video. I also did leave some screws loose, and I already have the oil drained and the fairing off, so just to really speed things up. Now to start, obviously, you're going to want to take the clutch cover off. I have this fancy aftermarket clutch cover from the previous owner, and I'm also going to use some power tools for disassembly. I think it's okay to disassemble with power tools, but I do not condone putting her back together with power tools. You really want to have some touch when you're torquing stuff down. So we'll zip this cover off with the last couple screws I have on, and I'll show you what it looks like inside. If it's the first time your clutch cover is coming off in a while, you might have to give it some smacks with a hammer really lightly. And there's some tabs on here that you can pry on. Be very careful when prying. Mine should come off pretty easy because I just had it off. And if you're careful with the gasket, you might be able to reuse it. But I recommend going with a new gasket if it's the first time the clutch has been off anyway, because that gasket's going to be pretty dry and hard, and it might tear coming off. So it's a good idea to just have a new gasket. Now, after you get the clutch cover off, you can see the clutch assembly. There's six bolts here that hold the pressure plate on. Behind these bolts are some springs. Those springs are what put the tension on your clutch when you release the clutch. So I'm going to zip these bolts off right here with a 10 millimeter. And again, I'm going to use the power tool. Like I said, I don't condone putting it back together with a power tool. I'm going to keep everything in order. I still have the spacers installed that come with the clutch mod that stiffen up the clutch. That you won't see those when you disassemble it in the stock condition. After you get those bolts and springs out, you can remove the pressure plate. You can already see that the drive that holds onto those studs, it's loose and wobbly for some reason why. I'll show you why in a minute. So when you take the pressure plate off, you'll see inside it's got this fancy little bearing and a push rod. Now, also to note, do not activate the clutch once you have the pressure plate off. It'll push the clutch push rod right out, and you'll be in a mess. In this case, we're just going to pull it out, set it aside. Make sure to keep track of that ring washer bearing. So now we can see this wobbly thing in here. It's actually the back torque limiter. It's what drives the clutch. And this is what we're going to want to eliminate. This is really what causes the bucking and the banging. Because you can see the play in this thing already. So we're going to zip this nut off. I can't really get close enough with the cameras. Doing this with the cameras is pretty tough. But the nut, on the edge of the nut, will actually be kind of pounded in with a chisel. Before you zip this nut off, you're going to want to bend that back out with a chisel. So what you're going to do is you're going to take a chisel. I have a modified 3/8 chisel. A 1/4 inch chisel will probably fit a little better. I had to grind it down on the edges so it fits. But all you're going to do is you're going to stick the chisel in the groove that has the dimpled spot, and you're gonna give it some good whacks with a hammer. You're not going to go to town with this thing. You're not going to swing it like a lumberjack. You are going to have to use a little bit of force, but eventually you'll get that little dimple pushed out, and you'll be able to free the nut up without damaging the threads. There's more than one way to remove this nut. I happen to have an impact hammer with a compressor in my garage, which makes it a lot easier. Otherwise, you'd have to remove all of your clutch plates, and they make a tool. There's also some homemade tools that I've seen out there. I'll post a couple links here on the video, or a couple pictures here on the video. But what it would do is it would hold this inner hub and allow you to break this free. But since I have an impact, as long as you're really careful, like I said, taking stuff apart with power tools, as long as you're careful, isn't really that big of a deal. Just don't want to strip anything. And going back together, you do not want to strip anything, break anything, and you want to get the torque right. But for this, you can zip it off with an impact hammer. Behind this nut, there's also a washer. You're going to want to slide that out. Let's set the washer aside. And pull this out. And here you can see the back torque limiter, this 2-piece drive set. This is what we're getting rid of, and we're replacing with the Brock's clutch mod. So here's the clutch mod. And that is what's going to be replacing this. Like I showed you guys in the video a little bit ago, you're going to be reusing these studs. These are the studs that the springs slide over and kind of line up everything with the pressure plate. You're going to be reusing these studs. When you install them into the clutch mod, you're going to want to use the red thread locker. That's going to prevent these from coming loose the next time you go to pull your clutch plate or your pressure plate off. If you didn't lock these, there's a chance that instead of the bolt coming out, the stud itself would come out. Make for a hard disassembly if you don't do that. You might run into some issues. So we're going to be reusing these studs. I'm going to zip these off real quick. And along with the clutch mod, you get some shims. Those are going to go in between the studs and the clutch mod. If you look at the clutch mod, There's little recesses where those go. The shims are going to go in there. So using a 12 millimeter, I'm going to zip these off, set them aside. They're a little looser than they will be from factory, especially because they come with thread locker on. I just threw it together real quick just so I can show you guys how it looks stock and how to do the procedure. So since I had this installed earlier, it was a little oily. What I ended up doing is blasting out the threads with some brake clean or some carb clean. That way I know that there's not oil in the threads. I know that the thread locker will stick. Luckily for me, that the thread locker really didn't leave a lot of goo in there. It would be hard to kind of scrape all that out, but luckily for me, that is not the case. On the other hand, there was a decent bit of thread locker stuck left on the studs. So what I did was clean them off best I could, and I'm going to put it together. Now, Brock's book says to use a vise and to torque these down by hand. I don't have a vise, and just holding it and then torquing it with a wrench or a ratchet would be pretty tough to get good torque. So I'm going to break one of my rules, and I'm going to use the electric impact to put these back together. So you're going to want to make sure that you install the spacers that come with the kit. They sit right in this little recess there, and then you thread the stud on top of that. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to set that in there. Apply some thread locker and thread that in there. I'm going to do that with all 6 of these. Then, like I said, I'm going to break one of my rules here. And like that, she's about ready to go in. Now, if you leave your clutch plates in, makes it a lot easier because it kind of holds this basket in. But you're going to want to make sure you set that all the way in. Now you have the nut and washer. You're going to want to install it the same way it came out. It is kind of like a spring washer. It's dished a bit. So you're going to want to make sure that it came out, or it's going back in the same way it came out. Oh, there you go. I didn't have her in all the way. All right, back to breaking my rules. Now, you're supposed to torque this to about, I believe it's 65 foot-pounds per Brock's manual. I'm probably going to overdo it a little bit, but I don't have the tool that's going to hold this in. So I don't advise doing this. I advise getting the tool that holds it in and torquing this properly. Don't judge me. That should be pretty good. Now I will also take my chisel and dimple that in. Just a little bit so it doesn't back off. Now that we have the mod in, we have our shims installed on the studs. Put a little bit too much thread locker on there. It's kind of hard doing this on camera. So now that we have that in there, I have that dimpled in so it shouldn't back off. What's next is to start putting her back together. So first will be our push rod with the ring bearing, or the clutch came out a little bit on me. I'm going to push it back in. Might be misadjusted. I might have to readjust that. Anyway, got the push rod in. Ooh, don't forget the bearing. I got really lucky here. There's a bearing that goes on that ring that was stuck to the pressure plate. Don't forget that. And the pressure plate's going to go on. You're going to line it with the studs. And Brock's clutch mod comes with these spacers here that go on top of the spring. So it will increase the tension on the clutch, but it will also increase the clamping force of the clutch, which is going to be a lot better the harder once you learn to hit harder and harder and harder. So first goes in the spring, then goes in the spacer, then goes in the bolts. Now, I'm not using thread locker on this because I want to be able to maintain this clutch and replace clutch plates as I go. I'm going to torque it pretty good and trust that it's going to hold together. And you don't want to do it because it's going to probably end up pulling the studs. Like I said, the reason you wanted to use the thread locker on the studs. So I'm going to finish putting these all together with the spacers and I'm going to zip it in. So again, I'm going to use the electric impact. Do as I say, not what I do. I'm just going to zip these in a little loose, and then I'm going to hand tighten them with a ratchet. And I'm going to crisscross, or not even crisscross, I'm going to go like 2 triangles, just like you're putting a 6-lug tire on. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. I snugged those down pretty tight as you really can get with a 1/4-inch ratchet. You don't want to go ham on these, but you do want them tight enough so they don't back off on you with vibration and use. So that's most of it. Now all that's really left is to put the clutch cover back on and fill her with oil and take her for a ride, test it out, see what it feels like to launch after you get rid of that back torque limiter that's really going to shake you up. That about does it for today's video. I showed you a couple options, but I really prefer the Brock's Performance Clutch Mod. But no matter which way you go, it really should help you smooth out some launches. I hope you guys learned something. I hope you gained some confidence to try this yourself. I want to see more guys at the drag strip, so hope you really enjoy this and I hope it motivates you. If you liked it, hit that like button. You want some more, hit subscribe. We'll see you next time.